We all love a good cover story. Old songs given new life by another musician who takes the established ideas and puts a new spin on it. The best covers don't just tell you about the artists that are performing them, they also tell you something about the original. They reveal the bones of the song, what absolutely has to stay, and what can be changed without breaking it. There are thousands of ways to handle a cover, some good, some bad, and some in between. But in today's case, we will be examining the 1977 song Hanging Around by the Stranglers and the excellent cover Ghost, released in 2023 as part of their Pantomime EP. Now, I know it's a great cover. Hopefully you know it's a great cover, but that kind of hearsay simply never holds up in court. So today, we're going to investigate exactly what makes these two songs, separated by over 40 years, such a great cover story. When I first started looking into comparing these two songs, my initial take was that Ghost actually took a lot more out of the song than they did add to it. You can hear it pretty clearly in a couple of places, especially in the introduction. You'll notice that the bass line and the organ fundamentally the same in both of them, but the guitar line actually is completely missing from the intro. So here's the original one. So you get a couple of stabs and then the guitar and organs together, right? And then you get your bass line in a second. There. Right, so fairly, you've got all three of the main components, all four of the main components with the drums as well, talking at the same time straight with that intro. But actually, if you listen to the Ghost one, that guitar line does not come in at all until the vocals do. Get those little stabs again. It's just the organ. We'll get another repeat of that. And then we're going to get that bass. And it's only when the vocals come in that you'll hear the guitar line now. Little slide and then it comes in. So yeah, that is obviously missing from the original song, which I immediately took to be like, okay, they're kind of stripping it back. They're making it sound bigger, but they're taking a lot of the musical ideas that exist and they're getting rid of them. The other big example of this I noticed from the beginning of my investigation to this was in the guitar solo. So in the original guitar solo for the Stranglers, it's really more of a sort of like back and forth. It's a double solo with the organ and the guitar. The guitar will play a motif, and then a couple of seconds later, almost in canon, the organ will play basically the same shape, but it's kind of a call and response. It's quite an interesting dynamic, actually. You don't hear stuff like this very much because it's not canon, because they're not playing the same part, but they are playing a similar part. They're both kind of improvising. It's like two people doing the same solo, slightly out of sync with each other. It makes it really, really interesting. There's the organ, right? It's a really interesting call and response dynamic. But if you look at the Ghost version, again, the organ line basically not present. You can hear it still playing the sustained chords underneath, but it's basically just been turned into a pretty standardized electric metal solo, right? It's the same solo. The melody of the solo is pretty much the same as the previous one. It's just missing that call and response, which is quite weird. But the biggest piece of this puzzle that I found to me the most obvious big change in the timbres, which again sounded at least on first listens or early listens, like a big portion of the original song was just missing, that is in the chorus. Where in the chorus, you'll notice in the Stranglers version, there's a very flowery organ line. It comes in, it's quite present throughout the entire thing in terms of the mix. It flies up and down, it's very scalic, it's very arpeggiatic. It runs in complete counter rhythm and contrast to a lot of the other stuff going on. It gives us this kind of quite wide open sort of feel to it, which I really, really like. So if you listen to this, listen to that rising in the back. Just that organ sound, especially because it's got such a sweet tone compared to how shouty Hugh is when he's singing. The back and forth of that is really, really nice. I think that's one of the larger key identifiers for this song and its character. But again, in the Ghost version, pretty much not existent. If you listen to that chorus now, that organ is basically just following the chords that everything else is doing. In fact, it is present, but you can actually barely hear the organ line in that at all. So I kind of got myself stuck into a rut. The idea being that Ghost had stripped it down, they'd taken away a lot more than they'd added, and that was somehow the way that it had managed to translate into sounding like a Ghost song. So I was all pretty much set to do an entire essay like this now with that as my main thesis. And then I was like, you know what I might do is I might take some of the stems and use fancy new AI tools to strip it apart so I can listen to the parts individually. And the bit that got me was that actually it is missing a little bit of sort of like musical flavor. That organ solo is not present, that guitar line is not there at the beginning, but actually a lot of those parts are kind of represented differently in different parts of the mix, being played by different instruments. And the one that stuck out to me immediately was the organ line in the chorus we've just listened to. So if we go down to the bare bones of the stems, you can hear in the original one, obviously, this very, very clear rising or, sort of like key line in the chorus, which is awesome. I really, really like it. So listen to that. I know it's phasing a little bit strangely because of the AI, but you get my point. It sounds amazing, actually. It has more of this like kind of ethereal build-up to it than I gave it credit for, even hearing it in situ. And we don't have that in the Ghost version. If you listen to the organ line being played in the Ghost version during that chorus, it's completely different. See, that's actually kind of interesting. The AI is having a difficult job pulling it apart completely, but as you can hear, it is just holding sustained chords. And what is sneaking into the background of that stem, because I guess it's very, very tightly meshed together, is the bit I was going to talk about, which is the guitar line that Tobias has added to that Ghost version in the chorus, that I think pretty much fulfills the same niche as the original with the organ line, with this rising thing, but instead they've chosen to do it on a guitar, and I don't know, it's actually really, really effective. It's subtly mixed enough that in full context, hard to pull it out entirely, but this is rising, rich guitar line. It's not the same as that organ line, but it definitely fulfills the same function. And actually, if you listen to that in full situ, it's so rich. You can't pull it out on its own unless you really like put your ear into it, but it really does help to have this elating feeling, which is very similar to what the organ is doing in that line. So then I figured out that actually a lot of it is to do with mixing and the performances of each instrument. So if you, again, go back to the intro and compare the tones on the organ line, it just immediately it says everything you need to hear. I mean, you don't even really need to listen to this in a stripped back way to be able to hear that one pretty concisely. Just listen to the keys in this opening bit again, that tone there. It's very harsh. It's got this kind of electric buzz to it almost. It's a very thick sound, it's quite distorted, whilst if you listen to the equivalent in the Stranglers version of it, it's way softer in its approach, which again, I think maybe on the surface you wouldn't assume that the non-punk version of this song has the harsher tones, but I think it does. It's so much more subtle, it's got so much less distortion, there's no distortion on it actually. A little bit in that pan there, on the right hand, which is conversely being played on the left hand, which is confusing, but yeah. Then we move on to the tones of, say, the guitars. So if you listen to the Ghost version of the guitar, again, I'm probably not going to surprise you when you see that it is extremely chunky. That is some proper old school classic rock bordering on metal power chords with some palm. Yeah, you stick that with just the drums on it. It's a different song completely, right? Whilst again, with the Stranglers version of this song, that guitar tone, way, way more janky, way cleaner, way less distorted. Well, okay, maybe not less distorted, but it's definitely got this like more tinny, less thick. I mean, I think that's what this is going to boil down to, is that the thickness of the texture is very important here. But it's got this, I mean, again, obviously you have to factor in that these were recorded over 40 years apart, so the guitar tones are going to sound different inherently just because of the way that they're recorded. But even still, I think it's a very much a stylistic and obvious choice. So more so, I guess, with Tobias with the Ghost version, to not replicate exactly how this sounds, right? So you put this all together, and these tones are so much more, I don't know, spaced out. If you listen to it as an entire, as a piece, you've got very clearly that organ in the left hand, or the left hand of the organ at least, and then you've got that bass line there, which again also not that distorted, not that heavy, not too much gain on it. And together then it's kind of like slightly janky, a little bit shuffly, quite spaced out sound. Each bit definitely has its own room to breathe. But when you take the sum of all the parts for this Ghost version, just listen to how much more staccato it feels. It's so much chunkier. Those tones, they all push together really hard. Just even the way that the drums, everything's so much cleaner. It's definitely, again, a production choice. It's a way that everything has been recorded. Just the fact that they were, in the analog days of the Stranglers recordings, I imagine that they didn't get a whole lot of goes. You have a limited amount of tape, you have a limited amount of time in the studio, etc. So the Stranglers got the best they could, and I think part of that slightly janky charm really, makes it sound like a Strangler song, but everything is not. It's perfectly on beat. Everything's a little bit sort of like shaking around and moving around, whilst with the Ghost one, everything is tight and it is close. Now, this is the final and most important piece of the puzzle. And it's probably the one that on the surface is the most obvious as well, and that is the vocals. The original started with a bass line idea that was very quickly sung over by Hugh Cornwell, and the song itself is about people they saw hanging around in London pub scenes, wandering around on a Friday night in central London. You get a lot of strange people, and this is them talking about it. It's delivered like guys talking around a pub table in a bar somewhere, talking, oh, do you remember seeing that crazy person over there, that vicar in the red dress? It's very conversational, it's anecdotal, and it feels that way. The way that it's delivered vocally really, really reinforces that feeling. Tobias Forge, to be fair, doesn't sound like loads of other people. Whether you love his voice or whether you hate his voice, he definitely sounds like Tobias Forge, and his voice is so much more nasal, it's much more melodic in its delivery, and I think it comes across as harsher, especially when it comes to the chorus. It feels like a sermon. So if you listen to just the isolated vocals of the of Hugh singing in the verses,
one of them comes closer, he's got a monkey on his shoulder, and the monkey's getting grinner, but his eyes are on the ground, he's just hanging around.
The phrasing on that is really, really, well, rough, to be honest, in a good way, but he is not following the rhythmic patterns at all. The only time you can hear him make a conscious effort to actually hit the notes when he's meant to is in that last hanging around. You can hear him there.
Hanging around.
He elongates it to make it fit because that's the most important phrase. It's the bit that keeps on coming back. It's the motif, and it's the end of that phrasing. So he needs to make sure that bit's tight. But everything else, he's just talking. He's talking in a very charismatic way, but he's just talking. Whilst you take Tobias's absolute hellfire of a vocal line for that same verse.
One of them comes over, and the monkey on the shoulder, and the monkey's getting greener, but his eyes are on the ground, he's just hanging around.
You can hear just how tight he is. He's staying exactly on there rhythmically. He's holding that note. It's not a particularly complicated melody because he's essentially translating something that was spoken word, but it's this very, very tight, put together thing. And in fact, interestingly, I'd have said the only time that one drops out and becomes slightly less tight rhythmically is actually at the end during that hanging around motif. Now that brings us to the chorus. Now let me give you a little bit of context for the chorus, because another question that we wanted to ask was, why pick this song? There are a couple of lyrics in the chorus that sound religious, and that's because they are. He says the word Christ quite a lot of times. But the quote I have got from Hugh Cornwell when it came to writing these lyrics is actually really interesting. So he said, the title of the song reminded me of a joke I heard. So I'm assuming that they had the title of the song hanging around before they'd written all the lyrics, right? And he goes, I thought it was funny. What a great way to spend Easter, hanging around on a cross. It's very flippant. It's silly, it's tongue-in-cheek. It's this idea that Christ is actually fine. He's chilling. He's sitting up on there that cross. But, don't bother. It's fine. I'm where I am. It's kind of funny. They've taken this idea of these people hanging around town and applied it to one of the more extreme examples they can. can. And this obviously works really, really well, because if you look at most of the other Ghost songs that have got covers of any type in them, most of them are fairly heavy on their religious imagery. Songs like Jesus, He Knows Me, songs like Missionary Man, songs like Bible, those songs are all very, very overt with their religious imagery. And it's kind of interesting that this one does feature some, but it's absolutely not intentioned that way. In fact, we have more quotes from Hugh Cornwell. He said, I find references to God and Christ very emotive. For a long period of time, I loved hanging around churches. There's something fascinating about the power of religious belief. I'm not necessarily a very religious person, but I am fascinated by the regalia and everything connected with it. I love using references to religion in my creative process because it's so emotive and controversial. So that sounds a little bit like somebody else I know, in that they are not religious, they've grown up around it, and they find the imagery, the storytelling aspects of it to be fascinating. There's quite a lot of music in the occult, hard rock, black metal, all of that kind of stuff, where I would say a lot of the writers have pretty much exactly that sentiment. And in fact, I've got quotes from Tobias saying stuff that's not quite the same, but it's pretty close. So he says, my mum is very liberal. She's never been religious. Spiritual, not religious. She presented church to me as more of an archaeological or museum-like institution. We went to Notre Dame and places like that because it was part of the art experience. I was always very in awe of those churches. It's pretty much the same sentiment, right? This growing up around it, being in these places, but not believing in it, just finding that kind of religious curiosity, I guess. And it's so interesting to me the way that that has manifested itself so differently in a song that is the same song with the same lyrics. But if you take this Ghost chorus now and listen to how Tobias delivers it, it's like hellfire is being shouted at you right now. It is turned into a sermon.
Cause he told his mother, he told her not to bother, cause it's all right in the city. He's live on the ground, it's just hanging around.
That doesn't sound to me, the way it's delivered, like it's just got Jesus chilling there. That sounds like it's almost, he's saying, don't bother, you guys aren't worthy of it. It's turned into this like fire and brimstone sermon, which I really, really appreciate. I think the way that he's able to get such a different feeling, and I know it's obviously a combination of the other stuff that puts that together, but he's able to get that feeling out of the same words. And now we've looked at it, essentially the same instrumentation as well. The arrangement is very, very similar, and I think that that is absolutely fascinating. So in conclusion, it seems like Tobias really, really understood exactly what made this song work. The song was written around the bass line. That is the most fundamental thing. In fact, pretty much all of the sort of like rhythmic stuff within the Ghost version of it is pretty homogeneous. It's very, very much dong, do, dong, do, 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 do. It follows that line with every single thing. Whilst the Stranglers version is a bit more spread out, it's a bit more splayed out, but it's got that rooted bass line that is very, very important to it. And then apart from that, it's taking things like knowing that that chorus should have a kind of flowery ascending line, something to combat the melody of the vocals. And in the original, we've got that beautiful, beautiful synth line, and in this, we have got that rising guitar line, which actually also, now you've heard it, listen to the song in its entirety, it will make your fingers curl up a little bit with joy, because it is a very, very nice tone of that guitar thing. So I think that what is more interesting about this is that actually Tobias picked the perfect song. Somehow the Stranglers 40 years ago wrote a song that has perfect Ghost DNA written all over it, and Tobias was able to find it, isolate the stuff that's important, reinvent little bits about it, but it's way more to do with the character and the flair, and turn it into a song that if I did not know the original and didn't know Ghost, would probably just assume that it was the original version of that song. And I think that is pretty interesting. The genius of this cover story was not what Tobias chose to change, it was what Tobias understood was something he should never have changed. And I think that makes this a case closed.